With the help of Hashem, we are learning. Upa, give me a second, Chevra. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Mem Dalid. We left off on Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis. We are learning about the prohibition that no one is allowed to occupy the Heichel while the Ketoides is being burnt. That's a pasuk that we're going to read out in Parshas Achrei Mois. And as we will be learning, no one is allowed to occupy the Heichel. That's Midoraisa. The Chachamim added at times also the area Bein Ulam LaMizbeach. We will also see that the pasuk is really speaking about during the time that the Ketoides is being offered. But we add to it also when other avodos that are being done inside the Heichel, especially on Yom Kippur, when the blood is being sprinkled inside the Heichel towards the Peroiches, that at that time there was also this prohibition that no one else is allowed to occupy the Heichel. And again, the Chachamim added, not only is no one allowed to occupy the Heichel, but neither is anyone allowed to be standing even between the antechamber and the Mizbeach. And really that's going to lead us into this question of whether Mailos are Midoraisa or Midrabanan. In this context, Mailos means an additional stringency. In our case, it's not that we say that the place of the Beis HaMikdash is Kodesh. Of course it's Kodesh. But there's a concept that there are different degradations, there are different madregas, there are different levels in its Kedusha. So you have Kedushas Harabayis, and then you have the additional Kedusha that you have from when you go from the Soireg until the Ezras Nashim. That area is called the Chayil. Then you have the Kedusha of the Ezras Nashim. Then you have the Kedusha of Ezras Yisrael. Remember, the 11 Amos. Then you have the Kedusha of Ezras Kohanim. The next 11 Amos. Then we'll see there was the area Bein Ulam LaMizbeach. Then you have the Ulam, then you have the Heichal, then you have the Kodesh Kachim. So is that something that's Midoraisa, or are these differences only Midrabanan? And from our sugya, we're going to try to prove that Mailas is Midoraisa. And on Daf Mem Daled Amid Beis, the Gemara is going to further elaborate the details, and we had a lot of details, even in the Mishnah, that differentiate between the avodah of the Ketoides that is brought every day, twice a day, versus the special avodah of the Ketoides that is brought on Yom Kippur. If we'll have time, we'll learn at the end of Moededik Marsha, that even from the numerical value of the word Kesef versus the word Zahav, we'll see that there should be, theoretically, a 12-time difference between gold and silver. And even in price, or at least that gold should be at least 12 times more valuable than silver. We'll try to bring that. We have Rabbi Chaim with us. We'll make the numbers down right now. We'll see that the difference now is a lot more. If I'm not mistaken, today silver is up as $30 an ounce. I might be wrong. We're learning at the Sivan Tavshin Pei Aleph, gold is mistama $1,800 an ounce. Right? If silver only would have been a 12th, then it would have been $150, right? In other words, silver might go up a lot, or gold might come down a lot, or not, and a lot more. Chavra, let us start on Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis, the last line from the bottom of the Amid. Baruch atah Adino Eloheinu melech haolam shar kol nivdvari. So, what the Gemara clarified is that even though after the shechita of the par, you needed to have another kohen holding the mizrak, the bowl, the basin that had in it the blood. And he needed to be memaris. He needed to steer it to make sure it doesn't congeal. And the Mishnah said that he stood, the kohen that was holding onto that cup, steering it, stood al roivat haravi'i, which means on the fourth row. So this floor was made out of tiles. So the fourth row in the heichal, even if it means the fourth row from the entrance, which is relatively near the entrance or exit, but in the heichal, and the Gemara says, well, that can't be because there's a pasuk in Achrei Mois that's Perek Tez Zayin, pasuk Yud Zayin, and the pasuk reads, and the Gemara is not quoting a brayso that begins with the pasuk that v'chol adam lo yeh ba'oyel moyed bevoyoy lachaper ba'kodesh atzeisoy, etc. And v'chol adam, really we know, doesn't only mean that no human being is allowed to be there, but al pi Kabbalah, not even malachim were allowed to be there. In other words, the privacy the connection that a Yid has with Hashem that's fully expressed on Yom Kippur, especially when the Kohen Gadol offers the Ketaitas, is that it's Hashem and us. We are Hashem's children, to the exclusion of all others, mamish. So how can there be a Kohen standing in the Heichel being mamaras the dam? The oil moed means the Heichel. So therefore the Gemara amended or gave us to understand that indeed no one stood in the Heichel. No one stood in the Heichel. The Kohen was going to be mamaras bedam outside when you leave the Heichel, going from west to east on the fourth row. And now let's open up the sugya. Last line on Daf Mem Gimel Lamed Beis. Tanach Rabbanim we learned in a brayso. According to this pasuk Achrei Mois, right, which is Vayikra Perek Tezayin pasuk Yud Zayin. The pasuk reads V'chol Adam Lo Yeh Ba'Oyel Moed. Daf Mem Dalet. So says the brayso Yochel, you might have thought that pshat, no one is allowed to be in the oil moed. Maybe here even means no one cannot even be in the entire Azara. Now, when and what is this pasuk referring to? So if you open up a Chumash, you'll see that Psukim Yud Beis and Yud Gimel and Yud Daled and Tezvav, the Psukim prior to this, are describing both the avoid of the Ketaitas of Yom Kippur, that is brought lefnai v'lefnim, and the sprinkling of the dam of the par and of the dam of the soyer inside the kodesh, inside the heichel. What is this pasuk referring to? Initially, we'll see why we understand it to be referring to Ketaitas. We'll expand it. So, in other words, when the Kohen Gadol brought the Ketaitas on Yom Kippur, no one is allowed to be in the oil moed. You might even think more. No. So therefore, the Gemara, the Brayso says, Talmud Leimer, ba'oil moed. The issue is only standing in the oil moed. Now, obviously, the word oil moed is the word that's used in the Torah when we're speaking about the inside, the tent of the meeting, corresponding to the oil moed in the Beis HaMikdash is what we call the heichal. Perhaps even the ulam, as we'll see, but not in the chatzar HaMishkan, not lifnim and hakloyim. There one could stand. So in the Beis HaMikdash, one could stand in the Azor. Ainly ela ba'oil moed sheba midbar. After all, the pasuk is speaking about Aaron. The pasuk is using the word oil moed. How do you know that even when we started to make Hashem's house more permanent? So there were different phases. We're not even going to speak about Gilgal, because by Gilgal, the Aron Kodesh wasn't in there, which is tied. There was a Heter Bamas during the 14 years that we were in Gilgal. But the next big upgrade is when the Mishkan was settled, was built in Shiloh, and it stood there for 369 years. So how do we know that in Shiloh? And then later, from David and Shlomo, and by Yesheni, Ubeis Eilamim, that the same prohibition continues. Now, Bachlal, the Havamin is a little bit difficult. Where else would we find that when the Torah speaks about something regarding the oil moed, that we would only apply to the oil moed? But be that as it may, how do you know? So Talmud Leimed, the same pasuk like we quoted, says, Lo yeh ba'oil moed lachaper ba'kodesh gavaldik. And Chevra, remember that aside of us calling the building, the sanctuary, as heichal, we also call it kodesh, which helps us differentiate between the kodesh and the kodesh kacha. So the Torah uses the word kodesh to make it clear that this prohibition is forever. Ainly elabashas haktara. Now the Gemara later is going to ask, why did the Brayso understand? And it understands correctly that this pasuk is primarily focusing on the avoid of the Ketaitas. After all, like we mentioned, Psukim 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 speak about the Ketaitas and the avodah of the dam that's sprinkled inside the Kodesh itself. So the pasuk is speaking about Ketaitas. Now the Brayso expands. How do we know that we apply this prohibition, which is a beautiful thing, that when you do the avodah, no one else is going to be there, is also b'shas matan damim. Matan damim, let's begin, is when the Kohen Gadol brings the blood into the Holy of Holies. That's how we are beginning. The Ketaitas is in the Holy of Holies. How do we know that when he then brings the Dam Hapar in the Kodesh Kachim? Achas l'mayla v'sheva l'mata, towards the covering. And then when he comes back in with the Dam HaSoyer, that during all of these steps, no one is allowed to be B'Kodesh. Talmud Leimer, the pasuk continues, B'voyoy l'chaper, which is completely extra. L'chaper. In other words, these steps also bring about atonement. Einli ela b'chnisasei. How do you know that these prohibitions continue until the Kohen Gadol, right, has completed his Egdish of the Kodesh Kachim, that the Heichel remains off limits? Talmud Loimer, that's why the pasuk concludes, Ad Seisai. Now the Braisa continues quoting the pasuk when it says, V'chipar ba'adoi, u'ba'ad beisoi, u'ba'ad kol kahal Yisrael. So says the Braisa that teaches us that kaparasoi koidemes lekaparas beisoi. In this Braisa, the word kapara lochoida refers to the vidui. Don't forget the Mishnah also called, remember, vidui is also a means through which we achieve kapara. And the Seder is first he kapara for himself. Then he does vidui for the sins of his household. And kaparas basically comes like kaparas echava kohanim, kaparas echava kohanim, which is the vidui of the par, comes before kodemes lechaparas kol kahal Yisrael, which is the avodah of the soil. End of Braisa. Says the Gemara, Amar Mardam, the master taught us, Eili elo b'shasak Torah. When you read the pasuk, you understand the pasuk only to be referring to the avodah of the ketores. Then the Braisa adds, how do we know that we extended also to the avodah of the dam? Asks the Gemara, my mashma, why did you understand and you understood correct that the pasuk is really focusing on the avodah of the ketores? Maybe the pasuk is b'chlal not speaking about the ketores. Maybe the Braisa should go in the opposite direction. Don't forget the prior psukim speak about all three: the ketores and the kodesh kachim, the dam hapar in kodesh kachim, and the dam hasoid in kodesh kachim. So Amar Rava, v'chein Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi, v'chein Amar Rabbi Lazar. Since this pasuk says v'chipar ba'adoi, u'ba'ad beisoi, u'ba'ad kol kahal Yisrael, true that the Braisa just learned from the Seder Hadvarim that first vidui for him and then for everyone else, and then noch the vidui shenoi al echav akoyanim am kodeshecha. But here, don't forget, the Gemara is focusing on the fact that the Torah speaks about kapara for everyone. Now, the damim, the par brings about kapara for kohanim. The dam hasoyer is for all the other Yidden. Which one avodah lechatchila brings kapara for everyone together? Ezeu kapara sheshava lo yule beisa yule echav kohanim ulechol kahal Yisrael. Have a oimer from the topics that are spoken out in Psukim Yud Beis to Tezvav, from the three Ketores, Dam Par, Dam Soid, it's the Ketores, HaKetores. Okay, Ze HaKetores, HaKetores. Very good. Gemara asks, well, if the Torah is speaking about Kapara and you're learning it from V'chiper, U Ketores Mechaperes, says the Gemara, yeah. And where do we find that? Tani, Rabbi Chananya, that Lomadnu liketoyre shemechaperes, from where Shenemar, and this is from that which is recorded in Parshas Koirach after Koirach va'adasi were swallowed by the earth. And the Yidden turned and accused Moshe and Aaron that Atem hamitem esam Hashem. And the Torah records that a terrible Magefa broke out. And the Yidden that brought the Ketores passed away. And Hashem wanted to show, like we learned Chumash Rashi, it's not the Ketores that brought about the death. Fakert, the Ketores is going to bring life. And Aaron took the pan of a Ketores and he walked amongst the people. The Torah records that. So from there we learned that it wasn't only in that one-time event that offering of, the unusual offering of Ketores stopped the Magefa, but every time Ketores is brought, not that it's brought for a specific sin, the way that Rambam writes, that Ketores was to bring about a good aroma in the Beis HaMikdash. The way Hasidus explains it is that when we are dealing with sin, even when we are doing tshuva, but sin stinks, so you're dealing with something that doesn't smell good. No, Al-Pi Hasidus is after the whole avodah of sin, there isn't any sin. So we're going from good to better. That is where you have the Ketores, which is why it doesn't have a bad aroma at all. Nevertheless, we still call that kapara. There's still an aspect of kapara associated with the Ketores. Okay. And we learned, the Gemara continues. So the Braisa tells us al loshen hara, and why is that? Because yavoi davar shebachashoy al pinigla means that the ketores is brought in private, which is exactly the sugya that we're learning right now. That's al pi nigla. I mean, al pi chasidus, davar shebachashoi is like we spoke about the three fires, that versus the fire that's on the outer mizbeach, that whenever was put on the fire, pashut bigashmis, it made noise. Because fighting against the behemoth is something that's very tumultuous. The ketaitis, the connection that we have with Hashem is so seamless that it's silent. But anyways, the ketaitis is called, whether it's because of that higher connection to God, whether because the ketaitis is dafka brought in private, and that has a connection, and therefore it brings atonement, al ma'aseh chashoy, which is normally when people speak lashon hara, they're not going to speak about it bepumbi, they'll speak about it privately. All right, says the
Rabbi.
Gemara. Yes,
Rabbi, quick question right here. What's the difference between the Keteres Mechaperes and the Soira Mishtaleach as far as the kapara to the?
well, like this, there are different sins for what you bring kapara. And it's a big chiddush what we learn now, that the ketores is mechaper, and we're learning it's only mechaper for lashon hara, which is a very subtle aveda. It's an aveda of speech. On the other hand, it kills people. Something unique about lashon hara. And the
Mishtalech, yeah.
It's mechaper for all the sins of the Yidden. All right, Tanan Asam, we are quoting a Mishnah in Kalim. The Mishnah writes that Porishin, that the Chachamim added to what we're learning about right now. This exclusivity, that when the Kohen Gadol offers the Ketores, and then we added not only the Ketores, but the Dam Hapon and the Dam Hasoid, that no one can stand in the Heichal, adds the Braisa Midrabanan, that Porishin, that they even needed to remove themselves, any Kohanim, Mibein Hu'ulam, Lamizbeach, B'Shas HaKtorah. Now people are going to jump and say, hold on, we just learned in the Mishnah, Mela, we moved back the coin, being Mamaras Badam Hapar, we moved them back, not on the Reva, the Revi, and the Heichel, we moved them back into the Azara. But the fourth row off the even if it's outside the Heichel, is still between the Mizbeach and the antechamber. So don't worry about it. But the Braisa is adding, the Mishnah is adding that Midrabanan, the concept of no one being there, doesn't only mean no one being in the Heichel. It means midrabanan, no one is allowed to be between the Mizbeach and the antechamber. Now comes along the Amoyre Rebbe Lazar, and he says, aha, let me tell you what this refers to. Lo yishanu ella b'shas haktorah de Heichel. It's gewaldig. And his statement is based on the following premise. Even though the pasuk that we mentioned is in the parsha of Achrei Mos, we're speaking about Yom Kippur. Rabbi Lazar understands that this concept of no one being allowed to be in the Heichel also biblically refers to every time the Kohen brought the Ketaitis in the Heichel. Every morning, every afternoon. And that Perisha, the concept of you are there by yourself, which is Midoiraisa, is tackle also in the Heichel, Bakoidish. On that comes along the Mishnah and Kalim, and they add that Midrabanan, you may not even stand in Ulam Lamizbeach. But who says Rabbi Lazar, the Chachamim only added another area in which no one is allowed to be, dafke when the Ketaitis is being brought in the Heichel. But when the Ketaitis is being brought in the Kodesh Kachin, the Chachamim did not add this other area. Of course, what the Torah writes stands. No one is allowed to be in the Kodesh. No one can be in the Heichel. But here on Yom Kippur, when he went Lefnai V'Lefnim, they didn't add, the Chachamim didn't add another area of Perisha. Kohanim are allowed to stand Bein Ulam HaMizbeach, and indeed, as we learned in the Mishnah, the Kohen that was holding the Mizrak that had in it the Dam Hapar stood in between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. Aval B'Shas HaKtorah de Lefnai V'Lefnim, which is on Yom Kippur, so the Din Torah obviously stands. Meheichel Parshei, but Mibein Ulam HaMizbeach like Parshei. Now, if you wouldn't have had Rabbi Lazar, I know that the Mishnah would have been problematic. But if you wouldn't have had Rabbi Lazar simply reading the Mishnah and Kalim, we don't see that from the Mishnah and Kalim. The Mishnah and Kalim says B'Shas Haktorah. We don't know what the Mishnah is referring to. Rabbi Lazar is the one that explained the Mishnah to us. And we're going to try to refute Rabbi Lazar, but we will not succeed because indeed what Rabbi Lazar says stands. So now we have the whole picture. The pasuk in Achrei Mos is speaking about the Ketores of Yom Kippur. The Braisa that we began today with adds, the Braisa says, really, the pasuk is also referring to the avodah of dam that's done on the Kodesh Kachin. Then we learn now on Mishnah Kalim that we already understand that this pasuk biblically is also referring to the ketoides that's brought every day in the Heichel. On that last step, the Chachamim added. What did they add? Not only no one should be in the Ulam, no one should be in the Heichel, no one should be Ben Ulam Lamizbeach. Says the Gemara Masav, Rav Adavar Ahavo, challenging Rabbi Lazar, or Amrila. Other people say that Kidi, in other words, there was a unanimous or a unknown challenger against Rabbi Lazar. Wherever the challenge came from, what's the challenge? It says in a Braisa that Rabbi Yossi Omer, Keshem sheporishin mi bein olam lamizbech, b'shas haktaram, kach porishin, b'shas matan par koyen Moshiach, upar helam davar shel tzibur. There are 3 times aside of Yom Kippur when the bloods not only are brought in the Kodesh Kachim, but as we'll learn soon, the bloods then again were sprinkled towards the Paroiches. They were then applied many times on the Mizbeach. This isn't the only time that there was a blood avoide in the Heichel. There are 3 korbanos, and one of them is going to be if and when the Kohen Gadol is a big scholar, and he erroneously misunderstands a specific detail of a prohibition that the Torah says that for its violation, Yechayiv Kares, which means that B'shoigig Yechayiv Chatos, he misunderstands in something that God does not want to be done. He thought from learning bad Pshat you could do it, and he did it. So normally you say that's a Korban Chatos. The Kohen Gadol who made such a mistake, who then violates based on his erroneous psak, he has to bring a whole different type of chatos, known as the par Kohen Moshiach. First of all, normally a chatos is a female animal, it's a male animal. Normally the avoid of a chatos, like all the other korbanos, its dam is applied on the outer altar on the top. This dam is applied in the inner altar, which automatically means that a side of the shirayim being later poured on the Yesoid, but no part of the animal will be eaten not only by the Kohanim. That's one type. Then you have when the Sanhedrin, if the Sanhedrin erroneously paskins regarding a detail of a sin for which a chayiv kares b'mezid, they said that you could do it. Certain detail of avodah zarah, of other sins, of chelav, a certain type of chelav. They said you can eat it, and Roiv Hakol went ahead and ate it. So even though normally a individual will bring a korban chatos, here you have what we call the par helam davar shel tzibur. And then there is the specific, unique detail of it that if their mistake was regarding any part of avodah zarah, then not only was an ox brought, but also a he-goat was brought. These are the 3 types of korbanos whose damim were applied inside the heichel. So says this Braisa, says the Tana Rebbe Yossi, same concept, that just like we have this din of Perisha, when the Ketoides is brought every day in the Heichal, when the Damim are offered from these 3 Karbanos in the Heichal, we also have a din of Perisha. Now, where do we find the difference in between the stringency of the Heichel proper versus that area between the Ulam and the Mizbeach? Continues Rabbi Yossi, Elosh Heichel, Parshin, Bein, B'shas Haktoram, Kosal Kadaitach. This is important. The Havamin of the Gemara, which will be the premise of the question, is that this line in the Braisa is referring to the Haktara of Yom Kippur. Ubein Shaloi B'shas Haktoram. Shaloi B'shas Haktoram would mean, if the Haktara means the Haktara of Yom Kippur, Lefnai V'Lefnim, Shaloi B'shas Haktara would mean the par and the soid, Lefnai V'Lefnim. Umebein Ulam L'Mizbeach, Ein Parshin, Ela B'shas Haktara. Then if Haktara is referring to the Haktara of Yom Kippur, Lefnai V'Lefnim, now we got ourselves a clear problem. What's if the Braisa means to tell you that B'shas Haktara, Lefnai V'Lefnim, not only do the Kahanim leave the Kodesh, the Heichel, but they also leave an Olam Mizbeach, that clearly goes against Rabbi Lazar. Shas Haktara Miya Parshi, but during the Haktara, again, the premise is the Haktara here is about the Haktara of Yom Kippur in the Kodesh Kachim, and the Braisa is saying that they leave even the area of Olam Mizbeach. My lab Shas Haktara L'Fnai V'Lefnim, Kash against Rabbi Lazar. Says no. The Haktara that the Braisa was speaking about in which there is a difference between the Heichel proper and the Ulam LaMizbeach is the Haktada that's brought every day, which is obviously brought in the Heichel. So asks the Gemara, look, let's read inside the Rashi, right? More a little bit under the middle of the narrow lines. Loi b'shas Haktada the Heichel. Ka'amar, that what? That when they would offer the Kodesh in the Heichel, then not only would no one be in the Kodesh, that's the understanding of the pasuk, but the Chachamim added also parshim mebein ulam lamizbeach. V'hachi kitani that keshem sheparshim mebein ulam b'shas haktora the Heichel kach parshim b'shas matan par koyin Mashiach to have a nama beheichel, they would leave the Heichel. So by the dam, they would leave the Heichel. By the Ketores, they would leave the Heichel and Bein Ulam Lamizbeach. But hold on. If the Braisa is only speaking about the Ketores that's brought in the Heichel, and the Braisa is telling you in the beginning that just like we leave by the daily Ketores, we also leave by these three Karbanos, so then it doesn't fit. Because when they would bring the Ketores in the Heichel, then people wouldn't only leave the Heichel, midrabanan, they would also leave in Olam LaMizbeach. And if we're saying that these three karbanos, the avodas damim, is like the Heichel ketores, then l'chayre it would mean that they also leave in Olam LaMizbeach. So so it's all the same. So they always leave midrabanan the Heichel, midrabanan even in Olam LaMizbeach. V'su loy. Another question, aren't there any other differences? Ha'ika, which is, it's if the Braisa is not speaking about the Ketores Lefnai V'Lefnim, but let us now speak about it. Ha'mayla, ha'ika ha'mayla, the Ilum Heichel, Parshi, Bein B'Shas HaKtorah Didei, Bein B'Shas HaKtorah Lefnai V'Lefnim. As we are learning, when the Ketores is brought, whether it's brought in the Kodesh Kachim, whether it's brought in the Heichel, Kohanim always leave the Heichel. No one can be in the Heichel. But the ilma bein ulam mizbeach, if Rabbi Lazar is correct, then loy parshi ela b'shas haktora the heichel. The Braisa should have made that difference. Forget about speaking about dam. The Braisa should have said, Rabbi Yosef should have says the difference between ulam lamizbeach and the heichel is regarding the ketores. If the ketores is brought lefnai v'lefnim, then the kohanim only have to leave from the heichel. If the ketores is brought in the heichel, not only do they leave from the heichel, they also leave in ulam mizbeach. Why didn't he mention it? Because Rabbi Lazar is wrong. So the Gemara says, no. That's exactly the pshat in the Braisa. Ha ketani. That's the pshat over here, which is important. What we are saying now is exactly that when the dam is brought in the heichel, the dam of the coin of Mashiach, Parsha Mashiach, Parelam Davar, the soil of Avodah Zarah, whenever an Avodah is done in the heichel, then midrabanan, not midraisa, no one can be in the heichel by the ketores and the damim. Midrabanan taka, no one can even be ben olam mizbeach. When the ketores is being brought in the kodesh kachim, when the damim are being brought in the kodesh kachim, then the din Torah of no one can be in the heichel stands. But here the chachamim didn't add ben olam mizbeach, which makes so much sense. In other words, when the avodah is being done in the heichel proper, if kohanim are only removed in one environment, practically, it could be they'll go over the boundary, and then they will be in the heichel during the avodah in the heichel. When the avodah is being done in the kodesh kachim, them not being in the heichel, they are already removed in one environment. So to add another environment is superfluous. Verstehst? They are already removed. The avodah is being done in the kodesh kachim. So 3 lines from the bottom. Indeed, haktani elo shebeheichal parshin bein b'shas haktara of Yom Kippur of the kodesh kachim. You leave the heichal bein shaloi b'shas haktara of the kodesh kachim. Shaloi b'shas haktara means, but when the ketores is being born in the heichal, they also have to leave. Ubein olam lamizbeach ein parshin 30th from down the beis elo b'shas haktara of the heichal. Like Rabbi Lazar, but when the Haktarah is being done in the Kodesh Kachim, then Kohanim don't have to leave Ben Ulam Lamizbeach. Frag the Gemara Ha'ika Ha'mayla, but there is another. Okay, so first of all, Rabbi Lazar is not refuted. But the Gemara is asking, but there is another difference that the Brisa should have spoken about. If everything the Brisa is speaking about is the Ketairas, why don't we say the same thing by the Damim, which is what we're saying, which is that when Dam is being brought in the Kodesh Kachin, they only have to stay out of the Heichel, which is the Pshat and the Pasuk. The Chachamim did not add Ben Ulam Lamizbeach. But when the Dam, the three examples of Rabbi Yossi, is being brought in the Heichel, not only can they not be in the, can no one else be in the Heichel, but Midrabanan, no one can be in Ulam Mizbeach. Why didn't we mention the Prisha of the Damim? The Bryce is only speaking about the Ketaitis. For Yikra Amayla, the Ilam Heichel, Parshi, Bein B'Kedusha Didei, Bein B'Kedusha L'Fnai V'L'Fnim. No matter where the Dam is being brought, whether the Dam is brought in the Heichel or even in the Kodesh Kachin, no one else can be in the Heichel. The Ilam B'Ilam Mizbeach, Loi Parshi, only if the avodas damim is being done in the heichel. But when the avodas damim is being done lefnai ve'lefnim, then we only leave the din Torah. No one can be in the kodesh, but the kohanim are allowed to be bein olam mizbeach. So Amar Rava, even though Rabbi Yossi in the Brisa was focusing on ketairas, the Brisa didn't add that because it's automatically already included. Because Shem Perisha Achasi. Notice we're speaking about the difference of the stringency of separation. And the Brisa made a point that when do you also have to leave an Olam Mizbeach if something is being done in the Heichel. Now the Brisa was speaking about the Ketaitis, but it's self-understood that the same logic will apply to any other Avodah. So what is the difference? What's the Maila between the Ulam HaMizbeach versus the Heichel? The difference will be, where is the Avodah being done? When the Avodah is being done in the Kodesh Kachim, then we only leave the din Torah. You can't. No one can be in the Heichel. Say that. It doesn't make a difference whether it's the Ketaitis in the Kodesh Kachim, whether it's Dam Hapar, whether it's Dam in the Kodesh Kachim. Only leave din Torah. But when any avoid is being done in the Heichel, whether it's the Ketaitis and the Heichel, or the three examples of Rabbi Yossi, the damim of various korbanos that are offered in the Heichel. So there, Midoi Raisa, no one can be in the Heichel. They have to do it all by themselves. God and you alone. Midrabanan, they added the Nulul Namizbeach. Pashat. Okay, Amar Mar, the master.
And the Ketairas that when it's being brought in the Heichel, that's the Raisa that it has to be vacated also by Nulul Namizbeach?
That's Midoi Raisa. Even
So
though Danny, the
that's the highest level. The Ketairas.
Well, let me say it like this.
In terms of how far you have to separate. Meaning the Ketairas in the Heichel is the most stringent, followed by the blood service in the Heichel, followed by the two services in the Kodesh Kachim.
I wouldn't word it that way because the pasuk is actually speaking about, Danny, the Ketaitis and the Kodesh Kachim. What's the pasuk God introduces, not the way we learned the Braisa. The pasuk Perek Tezayin pasuk Yud Zayin, we understand to be referring to the Ketaitis Lefnai V'Lefnim. Then we expanded it. Not only is it referring to the Ketaitis Lefnai V'Lefnim, it's also referring to the Damim Lefnai V'Lefnim. Then we learned that really we apply this Midoi Raisa to every daily Ketaitis. Then we learned, therefore, we applied Midoi Raisa to any Avodas Damim that's done in the Heichel. That's the Seder. And now the Chachamim came ahead and they said that any of the ones that are done in the Heichel come along now with a rabbinic stringency, Midrabanan. Not only may you not be in the Heichel, Midoi Raisa, don't even be, no one can be Bein Ulam LaMizbeach. And like Rabbi Lazar points out, don't apply that to the source. Because in the source law, which is referring to the Kodesh Kachim, the Chachamim don't see a reason to keep people out Ben Ulam LaMizbeach. It suffices to do the Din Torah. No one should be in the Heichel. I don't think we're disagreeing. I'm just saying that the origin is all in Kodesh Kachim. It's amazing how certain things were extended.
But I'm just saying that the Ketairas itself that are in the Heichel have a Din Torah that you can't stand Bein Ulam LaMizbeach as well.
No.
Or that's only D'Rabbanan.
That's only Midrabanan. Very good. The chiddush of what we learn now is that even though the Torah is referring to the avoid of the Kodesh Kachim, the Chachamim understand, they know that Midoi Raisa, when the Ketaitis is brought in the Heichel, there we also apply the pasuk from Achrei Mois, that's speaking about Yom Kippur, that v'chol adam liyeh ba'oil moed.
So practically, there's no difference between the keteris and the heichal or the dam service that's done in the heichal as well.
That's the point. No difference. And there's one rule that the Chachamim added, but they only added if it's being done in the heichal. The moment avodah is being done in the kodesh kachim, the Chachamim did not add anything. So Amar Mar Kach Porshin. Now we're quoting Rabbi Yossi from the Braisa. Kach Porshin b'shas matan koin Moshiach and par helam davar and the sir avodas kichavim. And all of that we understand to be midoy raisa. But you have to understand how far are we going from the pasuk in Achrei Mos. So the Gemara wants to know that din is not a din d'Rabbanan. How do we know midoy raisa that's the case? So Amar Rav Pados, because we have a gzeira shava, kapara v'yom HaKippurim. Now the Rishonim have a lot to say over here. Just to be aware that normally kapara means gzeira shava. It can't mean a gzeira shava because in one of these three, I don't remember which one of these three, we don't have the word kapara. So it's called a limud. It must mean over here a binyanav. But it's a binyanav is a tool whose result will be still considered biblical. Because regarding all of these three, there's some sort of binyanav that we learn from the avodas damim, from Yom Kippur, lefnai v'lefnim, that indeed midoy raisa, any avodah that's done in the heichal, sai ketoides, sai avodas damim. We're not speaking about putting the bread on the shulchan. We're not speaking about the menorah. We're speaking about ketoides and avodas damim. Midoy raisa, no one can be in the heichal. And now, midrabanan, you can't even be ben olam mizbeach. Now, Omar Rav Acha Barahava or Rav Ada Barahava. Now, I would like to prove from our entire discussion that Mailois midoy raisa. And like we mentioned in the introduction, Mailois means gradations of holiness. We are specifically referring to the following: that it's not that we say that the temple complex is holy. Of course, it's holy. But there's a concept of milas in Kedusha, levels of holiness. And again, just a quick go over the steps. The first level is that even though Yerushalayim is holy, even though Eretz Yisrael is holy, right? Asara Kedushas, these are the 10 Kedushas. You have Eretz Yisrael, then you have Kedushas Yerushalayim, but then you have the Kedusha of Harabayis. Then you say there's the Kedusha of the Chayil, which is the area between the Soireg and Ezras Nashim. Right? Then there's Ezras Nashim, and then you have Ezras Yisrael, then you have the 11 Amos of Ezras Kohanim, which is only until the Mizbeach, then you have the 22 Amos between the Mizbeach and the Ulam. Then we'll see in a moment whether the Ulam is part of that area or the other area. Then you have the Kedusha of the Heichel, then you have the Kedusha of the Kodesh Kachim. Is these steps the Reiser, the Rabbanon? So says Rav Ada or Rav Acha, from our discussion, you're going to have to say that all of these milas, all of these stringencies, all of these levels of Kedusha, one greater than other, is a biblical concept. Where is it alluded to in the Torah? Nowhere. So it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Now, why can't you say that these milas are midrabanan? Because the salka daitoch that all of these steps are only midrabanan. But midoy raisa, let's word it this way: the azara shears the same kedusha of the heichal. It's all the same thing. So maishna ben olam mizbeach. Like when the Chachamim added, not only can you not be in the heichal, you also cannot be outside. We don't make triple rabbanans. You make one rabbanan. If on a biblical level it's all on the same madrega, so then they would add the outside. Is an ayah that even midoy raisa, the outside is divided into levels, like we mentioned. You have the Esres Yisrael, you have the Esres Kohanim, then you have ben ulam mizbeach. Oh, so since it's considered separate areas, so the Chachamim, when they added, they only added in one of those areas. So the Gemara counters that that's not necessarily a proof. One can still argue that all of these many different levels of Kedusha is only midrabanan. And yet, when the Chachamim added that avodas heichel does not allow for people not even to be ben olam mizbeach, it's not because it has a different level of Kedusha. There are many Rabbanans that come from a practical point. They're coming from a practical place. Common sense is not that common, it's common sense. No, the goal is, like all the Rabbanans, put a fence for you not to violate a doiraisa. So it says the Gemara Dilma, maybe midoiraisa, the whole Azara has the same madrega of Kedusha. But mikru va'aylo mikol Azara, nami nifrishu, 1 second, Dilma, mikru va'aylo, the Chachamim were afraid that even though God says you can't be in the heichel, and you're not in the heichel. If you're going to be outside, you might forget and enter. So therefore, it's a practical fear. So they can say that mikula azara nami nifreshu, dema mikru va'ailu, bein ulam. I'm sorry. Dema mikru va'ailu mikula azara nami nifreshu, dema mikru va'ailu. All part of the proof. L'chayra, if they add an area that you can't enter, why would they only add bein ulam lamazbeach? Add the whole azara. You can't go into the out. Is again a raya that gradations are d'oraisa. So the Gemara says here, no, it's not a proof. Maybe the entire azara, including ben ulam lamazbeach, the Ezras Yisrael, the Ezras Kahanim, have one level of kedusha. But ben ulam lamazbeach, there is where they had the fear that you will accidentally enter the heichel during the avodah, because given the leimafsik midi, there's nothing stopping you. There's nothing there. The mizbech is behind you. So therefore, leimin karamilsa. So there's a practical possibility that someone will overstep his boundaries. But in the easternmost part of the azara, kivan the ikem is be'achitzain, which is mafsik, so therefore min karamilsa. And therefore, like we just explained, not that there are gradations of kedusha, but maybe just for practical reasons they limited their rabbanan beilul lamizbeach. Okay, so there's no proof, there's no refutation, but you can't prove anything from our sugya. And another statement, Amar Rava, Shma mina. Even whether milos are midoiraisa or midrabanan, how do we classify the antechamber? Is it part of the heichel? Is it part of the bein ulam lamizbeach? So Rava says shma mina kedushas ulam and the heichel chadamilsa. Why? Because the is al kedaitach that shtei kedusha is ninu, which means that when God says don't be in the heichel, God only meant the heichel. You could be in the ulam. So again, the Chachamim added another environment. So let them add the ulam. To add the ulam and then further out, ulam gufay gzeira. So you're telling me that during the avodas pnim, not kodesh kachim, but kodesh, you can't even be in the ulam mizbeach. V'neikam v'nix gzeira l'gzeira. Based on what you said before, it's just a practical reason they added another environment, because while the avodah, if you are only in one environment out, you might overstep your boundaries. So it will be enough to say don't even be in the antechamber. Why did they have to add ben ulam mizbeach? So Gemara says here again, there's no proof. Loi, maybe ulam ben ulam mizbeach had kedushin. Fakert, who told you? And heichel the ulam ashtei kedushas. The ulam is not on the same level of the heichel. The Chachamim only add one area, one halachic environment, and maybe the ulam and bein ulam lamizbeach are in the same level. So whenever the Chachamim add one area, it automatically includes bein ulam and bein lamizbeach. Now this is very significant. Let me tell you why it's very significant. Let's go back to what we learned in the Mishnah yesterday. If we're going to say that the ulam has the same height, the same level of kedusha of bein ulam lamizbeach, based on what we learned today, that when the avodah is done in the kodesh kachim, the Chachamim didn't add any environments for perisha, which means that the kohen cannot stand only in the heichal being memaras the dam, but the kohen can stand in the ulam, because even the Chachamim didn't add bein ulam lamizbeach and including the ulam according to this possibility when the avodah is being done in the kodesh kachim. So then the pshat in the Mishnah would be when we learned yesterday that the memaras bedam, when it says al roivat haraviyah shebehechel, is going to be beautiful. That taka means in the ulam, in the ulam. Remember we asked yesterday that according to many Rishonim, when the Kohen Gadol would then fill up the shovel of the coals, and the Mishnah says, and he put it v'hinicha al roivat haraviyah ba'azara. Some Rishonim say that's the same roivad of the coin being memaras the dam. But why would Rebbe change the lashon? This is the answer. If we don't know, it's inconclusive. But if the ulam is not on the same level of the kedusha of the heichel, then it's gavaldik. Then the coin that was memaras the dam was taka not standing in the heichel. That's against the din Torah. But he was standing in the antechamber. The shovel filled with red-hot coals were put completely outside. That's why Rebbe changed the lashon. But that can only be the pshat if The ulam and the hechel are in separate kedushas. Now, if the ulam and the hechel have the same kedusha, then when Hashem says that v'chol adam liyah ba'oyel moed, it automatically means not to be in the ulam. Then the pshat in the Mishnah will have to be that the kohen that's mamadas the dam was taka standing outside in the area bein umul mizbeach. Okay, that concludes the sugya. Now the Gemara is going to go back to the many details that the Mishnah gave that differentiates between the daily avodah of the Ketores versus the avodah of the Ketores done on Yom Kippur. So, for example, b'chol yoim choyte b'shel kesev. So you needed to get the coals from the outer altar. The shovel that was used was a silver shovel. Then they would pour from the silver shovel on a golden shovel. But on Yom Kippur, when it comes to the Ketores that's going to be offered lefnai v'lefnim, the same golden shovel. You didn't transfer it. My Tama, why would you not use two shovels? Why every day did you use silver? Why not always use gold? Use gold. Even if you're going to use gold and gold. So the answer is because and that's a concept that we find two times. We find it in Parshas Chukas. We learned so much about Chukas, but later after the Paraduma, when Miriam passed away, and therefore the Mayim that was Bischusa stopped for momentarily. And the whole story that Moshe Rabbeinu needed to speak to the rock again. And what we constantly mention is that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that what? V'ishkisa es ha'edah ve'es be'iram. Now Hashem makes a nest to save people's lives, okay? No, Hashem made a miracle. There was that much water even for the animals. That's one source that Atayra Chas al Yisrael. And the other source is from the fact that by the Bayis Hamenuga, even though the Kohen already realizes that this house will be declared Tamei, but that will automatically affect that everything in the house becomes Tamei. And even though most Kalim can be taken to the mikvah, but a Klei which happens to be cheaper, there's no Tahara, only Shiviras and Zel Takanasan. So the Chumash says, let the owner take all the Kalim out. That's the other source for Hatayra Chasa Amamayim Shal Yisrael. And there's always the counter to this, that Ein Aniyos B'Makam Ashirus, which is beautiful. A paradox is great, just to be aware of it. Sometimes we say that Hatayra Chasa Amamayim. Sometimes we say the opposite. Let's go back. Hayoim Bar Yom Kippur, you didn't use two shovels, but Chayte B'Shal Zahav, you used one golden shovel, and Uba. I just want to add one little detail, that when you use a golden shovel to take the coals, over time, the golden shovel will get used up. So that's why they use the silver. Just to explain, silver is less expensive, so it goes on. So even if that's going to have to be exchanged, it's going to be a lesser expensive one. Now, on Yom Kippur, you only use gold. Why? So the counter to that here will be Chosh the Kohen Gadol. No, Baltashch is the Gufa Adif. If the Torah is Chas on your money, then for sure the Torah has Rachmanis on your physical health. Right. The original silver shovel had the amount of 4 kav, correct? And it was then poured on the shovel of 3, from 4 kav to 3 kav, and taka 1 kav fell on the ground. That was the Tanach. And then we learned in the Mishnah yesterday that the Rabbi Yossi holds, no, that every day the silver shovel had the amount of 6, right, of 1 saw. 1 saw 6 kav, and they poured it into the golden. No one argues regarding the golden daily that only had the amount of 3 kav. Now, Tana, we learned in the Braisa that nispazaru loy kav gecholim, that indeed, let's go Lashitas Tanakama, that you took it from a shovel of 4 and you put it into a shovel of 3, which meant that 1 kav fell on the ground, indeed, but they had to be very mindful not to leave the burning coals on the ground, because Kahanim are working barefoot. Get a practical din, and Mechabdom la'ama, they were very good, they were careful to right away sweep the red hot coals into the canal, making sure that it doesn't pose a danger for a kohen getting burned. Now, how much coals were there? Again, Latanakama, 1. Rabbi Yossi that says the silver was a saw, which is 6 kav, and the golden was 3, so there were 3. But we got ourselves now l'chayda, 3rd shita, which we're trying to minimize arguments. In one Braisa we learned take chada kav, that the overflow was 1 kav, which fits. But the problem is we learned in another Braisa that there were 2. Now who would author the 2? Bishloi mahach l'tani kav. That follows the Rabbanon of our Mishnah. Silver was 4, the gold was 3. A difference of one. There should have been only one surplus. The Rabbi Yossi would hold there would be three. Who holds two? So Amar Rabbi Chizda says Rabbi Chizda, that is the Tana of Rabbi Yishmael B'noi Shel Rabbi Yechon Ben Roikehi. The Tanya Rabbi Yishmael Ben Roikehi says that Shel Kabayim Hoya Machnes. In other words, we removed it of 4. That's our Chachamim. The silver was 4, but the golden didn't hold 3 kav. He held that the golden one was of a lesser amount, only 2 kav. 4 and 2, the difference is 2. Rav Ashi says, I'll tell you that our Mishnah even follows this Bryce, even follows Rabbi Yossi. We're going to learn many times together, just bekitz it over here, that as time went on, the measurements were made larger. And that was the whole concept, that when you make a measurement larger because of inflation, you can never add more than a 1/6, right? A shtus. But there used to be that a saw of a midbar which was 6 kav, later became 5 kav Yerushalmis. In other words, the kav, that amount, they made the measure larger. Now it's perfect. The Mishnah is speaking about saw. We said saw 6 kav. No. Saw is 5 kav Yerushalmis. And therefore, between 5 and 3 has to a 2 extra kav of coals that would fall down on the ground that was swept into the Amma. The shovel that was used to bring the coals inside was heavier, and today relative is kala was lighter. Tana we learned in the Brayso. The sides of the keli were thicker. Don't forget the handle of Yom Kippur was longer, but still overall, because of the sides being thicker, it weighed more. And Bahayoim and on Yom Kippur, the coals being taken, lefnai v'lefnim, was rach. Another difference in the Braisa. Kevin woke up, he has a picture over here, and hayoim arucha. Today the handle is longer. My tama, why longer? You want it to be lighter. Chulsha the kohen gadol, for his arm or his underpit, his armpit. You know, you would put it under his hand. There's no picture of that, but that would help him carry it in. Lefnai v'lefnim. Says another detail. A very meaningful detail. Tani we learned in the Braisa. Rashi says ni'ashtik was a certain type of ring that was attached to the handle whose purpose was to make noise when you walk with it. And if you remember that it says in the Chumash regarding the Me'il that had underneath it bells, because there was an inyan that the nishma koiloi. On Yom Kippur, when the Kohen was wearing the Big Day Lavan, he wasn't wearing the Me'il, and no one heard the Kohen Gadol walking around. So he says like this, every day the Ketaitis is handled, the handle of the shovel, of the coals, didn't have this bell, this ring. It was not needed, because you already had the Benishma Koiloi. But Vahayoim on Yom Kippur, he's walking only the Big Day Lavan. There was this ring in order, this concept that the noise should be heard, that here is coming the Kohen Gadol to do the Avodah. That was accomplished through the Keli. People say, well, 1 second, B'chlal, En Katega Nasa Saneger, the Kohen Gadol is not wearing Big Day Lavan. Simple, he is going here with gold, with noise. Just don't confuse. Begodim have to be Lavan. Don't forget, guys, that Lefnai v'Lefnim, let's say the Aron Kodesh was made out of gold. Doesn't bother us if there is gold in a Keli. There is no gold on his garment. But here it's a clay shadas. On this clay shadas, not only was it gold, but also it made noise. Let's go weiter. That b'chol yoyim hayav zahava yorik. Every day, the type of gold in which you put the coals that went in the heichal was yellow gold. And on Yom Kippur, it was a reddish gold. So Amar Rab Chizda, I want you to know that Shiva, Zahavim, Heim, there are 7 types of golds. You have stam gold, ordinary gold. Number 1. Number 2, we're going malmata lamayla, v'zahav toiv, good gold. Then we have number 3, the gold that comes from a place called oifer. Then number 4, you have zahav mufaz. Mufaz means lustrous gold. Then you have another level called zahav shachut. We'll see in the Gemara what that is. Then you have number 6, zahav sagur. We learned zahav sagur, that King Solomon, right, he made the menorahs of zahav sagur. We'll see closed gold. And then the highest madrega was uzahav parvayim. Zav Parvayim is this reddish gold. And now the Gemara breaks it apart. How do we know that? Let's begin with that. There's Zav and Zav Tov, that we see from the Chumash. Right? When it says regarding the Pisha, you remember? Hu asoivev es Eretz HaChavila, in the beginning of the creation, the 4 rivers. And it surrounds Eretz HaChavila, that there you have the gold, and then the Torah adds, V'zav ha'aretz hahi toiv. Now, if the fact that the Torah writes that gold is good, is Shoyna Raya, that you have stam gold, then you have good gold. That's 2 madregas. The next level up is called Zahav Oifir, and that means the gold that comes from the location called Oifir. Then you have, next level is called Zahav, right, the 4th level up, Mufaz, lustrous gold, Daf Mem Hey. What makes gold lustrous? Shedoima Lefaz. It has a luster like a pearl. It's a unique shine. Then the level above it is Zahav Shachut. Shachut means Shenitfa Kechut. It's gold that could be spun like a thread. You know, it's so pure and so soft that whenever they would make golden threads, they would use it from this great type of gold. Zav Sagur, even greater. Why do we call it closed gold? That Bishash and Niftach, that whenever people are selling this type of gold, that's so great, all of the other stores that are selling gold can close down shop. Kol HaChanuyos Nizgaros. And the final highest level is Zav Parvayim. Why is it called Parvayim? Shedoime ledama parim, because there is this reddish hue, there's this reddish tinge, like the blood of the par. Now we're going to have a few minutes, so we're going to go to the Marsha Chedushi Agades, and we're going to read the following. Koydem Kol says the Marsha, why are there 7 types of gold? Shiva minis of v'chulei, so kasva toisves, zohav toiv, the Furish Yerushalmi, that that the way you understand, the way you differentiate one level to the other is that whenever you put gold in a refinery and you further refine it, so there is the excess, there is what will be considered the psoilus. Once you get to these greater levels of gold, you can put it in a refinery and nothing, it's going to be pure. So says the Marshav and Nida Lefizeh, or the Pirush like we find in science, that there are 7 Bechlal types of metal, says the Marsha, and they are connected to the Zayin Koich V'Leches. They are connected to what we call the seven moving planets. And we find, says the Marsha, that gold is connected to the sun, and that silver is connected to the moon. And listen to these words: V'lachein haza'av la'olam shava b'shel yud be'shel kesef. Gold, let's add the words at least, is at least valuable 12 times more than silver. And he brings some toisves. The mishum the mahalach hachama, because the difference in movement is that the sun goes around the world once in a year. The moon goes around the world, so to say, 12 times. It's once a month. So there is this difference of 12. Furthermore, he says, and the emes of that is that Zohav is numerical, right? Zayin Hevez is 14. What's Kesef? The mispar of Kesef, Chevrem, Kesef is 160. What's 14 into 60, or what's 160? Kesef divided by 12, it's 13.3. It's more or less Zohav. Gewaldig. And therefore, V'lokach, Yesh Gamkein, he writes, the reason why you have 7 different types of gold, says the Marsha, is because even though every precious metal is connected to one of the planets, and gold is connected to the sun, but inside the gold, you have the influence from the other planets. And since you have 7 moving planets, so there are 7 levels in the Zav, and the highest level of Zav is the level, right, that has no influence than anything other than the sun itself. Just to point out this concept of price that we mentioned, right, that Hazav lo'olam shava b'shel yud beis kesef. That would mean, that if gold is taka $1,800, divided by 12, then the price of silver today should be $150, and it's not that. So many people from here would say, either buy silver or quickly sell your gold because the price of gold is dropping. Or just learn Torah and don't buy commodities, and you'll have menuchas hanefesh. Everyone can follow their approach. God willing, to be continued.
The 7 levels fit with Rav Ashi, though?
No, come on.
Does Rav Ashi say there's only 5 levels?
No, he doesn't.
Huh?
Where did Rav Ashi say 5 levels? Rav Ashi said 7 levels.
No, he said that the first 2, the good and the regular level and the good, is 2 levels in each of the 5 levels. There's really 5 types of gold.
No. That's not, you understood it that way?
Yeah, sure.
Zov, and then you have Zov Toiv, and then, Zov Toiv, and you go up.
Oh, all right.
Don't buy commodities or don't buy crypto.
Buy Toiv. Toiv is the best of Schayre, Chevron.
Okay.
The best investment.